One of the ways in which many theologians have tried to characterize the Reformation or to summarize the theology of the Reformation is by this idea of the five solas. And sola is just a Latin word which means alone. And we speak sometimes about Reformation theology as all about Christ alone and faith alone, grace alone, Scripture alone, and God's glory alone. Now, these five solas of the Reformation weren't coined by the Reformers themselves. It's not as if Martin Luther or John Calvin started talking about these five solas. It was later theologians and people in the church who began summarizing Reformation theology in this way. And yet it really is a marvelous way to summarize what the Reformation was all about, and I believe a way that we can really get to the heart of the religion that is taught in Scripture.
Grace is one of those words, of course, that is very, very familiar to Christians. It pervades the language of Christianity. And yet perhaps it's one of those words that, while we assume we know what it means, actually requires some kind of filling out. Because the doctrine of grace, the understanding of grace, stands at the very heart of God's dealings with His people. It's rooted in the character of God. It's connected to the nature of this fallen world. To understand grace correctly is to understand sin. It's to understand the costly manner in which God deals with sin. And it's to understand our place as human beings as we stand before a sovereign and holy God. Grace is a powerful aspect and action of God, and it changes and transforms everything, and it should change and transform how we think about everything.
If the church is to proclaim the same Christ as the Reformers, we must understand and embrace Christ alone with the same clarity, conviction, and urgency. To do this, we need to think a bit more why Christ alone is at the center of the Reformation solas and the heart of all Christian theology.
Faith alone, which the Latin is sola fide, because we confess and affirm that salvation comes by God's grace alone and not our efforts. That's what we mean by faith alone. Salvation comes by God's grace alone. Faith alone is something to guard and to cherish. We're to guard it, but we're also to cherish the truth. You know, it's important to realize we're not just guarding and protecting and defending the truth. We are doing that, but we're also cherishing in it.
The Reformation doctrine of sola scriptura is just as important today as it was in the 16th century. In the 16th century, the Reformers faced off against Rome because the Roman Church had elevated tradition and its magisterium to the level of Scripture. Nevertheless, Rome still believed Scripture itself was inspired by God and therefore inerrant, that is, trustworthy, true, and without error. Since the 16th century, Protestantism and its view of the Bible has undergone an evolution, really, in its identity. Movements such as the Enlightenment, liberalism, and more recently, postmodernism have elevated other voices to the level of Scripture, or sometimes even above Scripture, and the inspiration and inerrancy of Scripture have been abandoned. Many Christians in the church have no idea what sola scriptura is or what it entails. What is the relationship of the authority of the Bible to attributes such as inspiration, inerrancy, clarity, and sufficiency? Even if we accept that the Bible alone is our final authority, we may have no idea why this is true.
Talking about God's glory alone is a way to, it keeps our focus from being self-centered. It's not ultimately about how I can be saved or how I can find religious truth, but how God is glorified in bringing salvation to this world, how God is glorified in revealing Himself and making His truth known in this world.